New York residents puzzled as small planes circled the Statue of Liberty, trailing banners proclaiming new federal state of China. Who are the people behind the message? A Chinese student in Melbourne, Australia is speaking out for freedom in China, but now her father is facing the consequences and has been threatened by Chinese police. Google says Chinese and Iranian hackers have targeted Biden and Trump campaign staff and warns anyone helping on a political campaign to be vigilant. And Sweden's former ambassador to China on trial today. Authorities say charges against her are unprecedented in modern times. It has to do with a series of meetings she helped arrange over the fate of a bookseller. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Chinese student in Melbourne, Australia is speaking out for freedom in China. But now her father is facing the consequences and has been threatened by Chinese police.
大家好，我是最后动物园，我是一名90后的社会行动者。
In an effort to tell her story in opposed China's totalitarian regime, she attended the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. To protect herself, she uses the name Zhu on Twitter. She used it to organize ceremonies, mourn Dr. Li Wenliang, and criticize the regime for suppressing Chinese people's freedom. Last year, she went to Hong Kong to support the city's pro-democratic movement. But in April, China's National Security Department discovered Zhu's identity. They called her to announce her so-called crimes and urged her to hand over her Twitter account and password. She refused. Next, the police contacted her father, demanding he come to the police station at midnight. They tried to force him to persuade Zhu to go back to China and surrender. Zhu is over 20 years old and has been living in Australia for 1 year. She first began to see the truth about the CCP when she was a child. In an online video, she recounted breaking through the internet firewall while she was in middle school. That's when she found information about the Tiananmen Square massacre and was left feeling shocked and deceived. That's when she first decided to do something about it.
I learned when I was a child that the Chinese Communist Party has done a lot of cruel things. I felt people around me were accustomed to the bad things, but I could not put up with it.
One of the many cruelties she learned about was forced organ harvesting. She says the organs come from Falun Gong practitioners or people who have been sentenced to death.
I had family members who worked in a hospital. It is true that doctors take organs from Falun Gong practitioners. Everyone knows that the source of the organs is a problem, but doctors consider it normal. They do not see it as an evil act, but it's really unacceptable for me.
In memory of the Tank Man, an unidentified Chinese man who stood in front of tanks as they tried to leave Tiananmen Square in 1989, she made a standing sign. Zhu says she believes young people are different nowadays than they were 30 years ago.
People who got involved in the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests felt that the fate of the country was on their own shoulders, and they must be responsible for the future of the country and its people. But the current young generation no longer feels that the country is their own. On the contrary, they feel powerless. They see themselves as victims.
She says it's important for young people to participate if they want to overcome the CCP's control.
In a totalitarian regime, anyone can become a minority and face persecution. People can only reject the feeling of powerlessness when more young people join together and participate in democratic movements with creativity and passion. That way, more like-minded people can be connected. They may one day overthrow the regime.
On Wednesday, several small planes flew over New York's Hudson River, trailing banners that read New Federal State of China. Fugitive Chinese billionaire Guo Wengui and former White House advisor Steve Bannon said on Wednesday they plan to establish a new federal state of China. So far, there hasn't been much response, but one person's reaction surprised many. On Thursday, the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, a video posted by Guo showed a well-known Chinese sports star calling for the removal of the Communist Party. Hao Haidong is a household name in China. The 50-year-old was a national soccer star in the 1990s and 2000s and is a former member of the regime's military. In a video, Hao read a manifesto in Mandarin. In it, he said eliminating the Chinese Communist Party is a matter of justice. He denounced the CCP as a terrorism organization, accused it of unleashing the virus on the world, and criticized it for cracking down on Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. The video is blocked in China, but made its way into the country anyway. Social media WeChat's index showed that Hao Haidong was searched more than 20 times as much as usual, and nearly 10 million times more the day the video was released. But China's censorship machine acted quickly. Hao's Weibo account, which has over 7 million followers, has been removed. Several Chinese sports forums and media have denounced Hao's statement and now refuse to report about him in the future. Some of them didn't even use his name, instead calling him a sports figure last named H. India and Australia signed 2 bilateral military agreements yesterday, deepening cooperation between them. The 2 countries released statements after a virtual summit between their prime ministers. The pacts come amid rising military tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. The move comes as India works to bolster its defenses amid escalating tensions brought on by the China-India border dispute. Military commanders from India and China are scheduled to meet on Saturday for diplomatic talks. Chinese troops yesterday moved into a disputed section at the Indian border. Both sides claim ownership of the area. It's known as the line of actual control, but the exact boundaries are unclear. A trial starts today for Sweden's former ambassador to China. Authorities say she overstepped her mandate when she arranged meetings about the fate of a dissident bookseller. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
Sweden's former ambassador to China starts her weeks-long trial on Friday. Swedish prosecutors charge her with arranging unauthorized meetings about dissident bookseller Gui Minhai. His abduction sent the relationship between China and Sweden on a downward spiral. Gui is a Chinese-born Swedish national known for publishing books critical of Chinese Communist Party leaders. In 2015, he disappeared from his home in Thailand and reappeared months later in Chinese custody. Sweden pushed for his release, but in vain. A Chinese court sentenced him to 10 years in jail in February. In 2019, Gui's daughter wrote in a blog that then-Ambassador Anna Lindstedt had arranged for her to meet with 2 Chinese businessmen in Stockholm who said they could help her with her father's case. Angela Gui said Lindstedt reassured her these are people she trusts and that she'd join the meeting as well. In the meeting, the businessmen said they have connections with the Chinese Communist Party and offered to help secure Gui's release. In exchange, Ms. Gui would have to keep quiet and stop engaging with the media. She had been actively campaigning for her father's release. Ms. Gui said Lindstedt added if the activism and media coverage continues, China might punish Sweden. Ms. Gui later contacted Sweden's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who said they had no knowledge of the meeting. After she published her blog post about the incident, Swedish authorities recalled Lindstedt from Beijing and started an investigation. Lindstedt is charged with arbitrariness during negotiations with a foreign power. A Swedish prosecutor said it's unprecedented in modern times. Lindstedt denies the allegations. If convicted, she faces up to 2 years in prison. Parts of her trial will be held behind closed doors for national security reasons. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News, New York.
Google says state-backed Chinese hackers are attempting to hack campaign staff working for Joe Biden, and Iranian hackers are targeting the Trump campaign.
Google says state-backed hackers from China have targeted staffers working on Joe Biden's presidential campaign. Google also says Iranian hackers targeted the email accounts of President Trump's campaign staff. The announcement is the latest indication of the digital spying routinely aimed at top politicians. The head of Google's threat analysis group says there's no sign of compromise of either campaign. This isn't the first time Iranian hackers have attempted to hack Trump campaign officials' email accounts. A Google representative says the company sent the hackers a warning and gave the information to federal law enforcement. The public tweet offered by Google is a sign of how sensitive Americans have become to digital espionage efforts aimed at candidates. A response from the Biden campaign suggests staffers are not surprised and were even prepared for such attacks. The Charming Kitten Iranian hacking group that targeted the Trump campaign also made headlines for targeting pharmaceutical company Gilead. Cybersecurity firm FireEye describes the two hacking groups as espionage actors and said they were likely attempting to collect intelligence rather than steal material to leak online. A blog post from Google gives specific cybersecurity tips for those involved in political campaigns. The post suggests everyone involved in the campaign be aware that they could be a target and that there should be a person responsible for handling cybersecurity matters for the campaign organization as a whole.
Michael Pack is the new CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees state media like Voice of America. Pack, a conservative, was nominated by President Trump. He faced opposition from Democrats who feared his political leanings would erode the agency's independence.
Not the yeas are
the vote of 53 to 38. After 2 years of opposition from Senate Democrats, the Republican-led Senate voted almost entirely along party lines. Michael Pack will serve for 3 years as the USAGM's first Senate-confirmed CEO. The USAGM oversees VOA and its sister outlets, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and the Cuba-oriented Radio and Television Marti. The Trump administration in April accused VOA of amplifying Chinese Communist Party propaganda. At the time, the White House cited 2 examples where VOA had allegedly promoted CCP propaganda about the spread of the CCP virus. Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee tried unsuccessfully 8 times to postpone consideration for the nomination of Pack 2 weeks ago. At his nomination hearing, Pack said he would ensure journalistic independence. VOA was created during World War II with the goal of airing unbiased news to combat Nazi propaganda and promote American values to the world.
The May jobs report is out, and it shocked economists. The number of people unemployed in May actually fell after analysts predicted it would rise by over 8 million. The president called it the greatest comeback in American history.
Jobs are back and unemployment is down. A surprising report from the Labor Department shows 3 million jobs were added last month. Analysts had predicted a loss of more than 8 million.
And we saved millions of lives. And now we're opening, and we're opening with a bang. And we've been talking about the V. This is better than a V. This is a rocket ship.
The unemployment rate fell from 14.7% to 13.3%, stunning Wall Street. Many feared it could have hit 20%.
Today is probably, if you think of it, the greatest comeback in American history. But it's not going to stop here. It's going to keep going.
The leisure and hospitality sector posted a staggering net gain of 1.2 million jobs after suffering its worst month ever in April. Construction and manufacturing, which started reopening gradually in many states, hired almost 700,000 between them. Healthcare added nearly 400,000 staff. That's after it lost 2 million back in March and April when hospitals cut back on elective surgeries.
Education and health services rose 424,000. Retail trade is up 368,000.
Markets rallied on the news. The Dow Jones was up over 3%, the S&P 500 over 2.5%, and the Nasdaq jumped around 2%. The Nasdaq actually reached an all-time high during trading, but fell just below that level by closing. But FX Street's Joseph Trefisani says it remains to be seen whether the overall economy will make a quick recovery. There's never been such a shock to the global economy, so economists still don't know what to expect.
The size is unsurpassed in any experience of any modern economy in the history of the world. So it's very, very difficult to do much more than guess.
A major factor will be if consumers are willing to get out and start spending again. Early indicators like a jump in summer flight bookings signal people may be ready.
So I think one thing that is getting underestimated in numbers is the simple desire of people to reconstitute their lives, to put themselves back together, to get started recovering.
And states are continuing to reopen with big economies like New York still to come.
In our business roundup, the U.S. will allow some flights from China after Beijing said it would ease its restrictions on U.S. flights. Nearly all U.S. states reportedly could try to break up Google's advertising business. And JCPenney is closing over 100 stores.
Pulling back on previous threats, the U.S. will allow 2 weekly round-trip flights from China after Beijing said it would allow some U.S. carriers to resume flights. United and Delta will both have 1 weekly round-trip flight starting next Monday. British automakers Bentley, Aston Martin, and McLaren announced nearly 3,000 job cuts over the past 2 weeks. On Friday, Bentley says it plans to cut 1,000 jobs in the UK, or about a quarter of its workforce. This comes one day after Aston Martin said it plans to cut 500 more jobs. CNBC reports that Google's control over the digital ad market could be challenged. U.S. state attorneys general are considering pushing for a breakup of Google's ad business. It's part of an ongoing antitrust probe by the Justice Department in nearly all 50 states. Google hasn't responded for comment. JCPenney will start closing over 150 stores next week in an effort to shrink its footprint. The Texas-based retailer filed for bankruptcy last month, making it the biggest retailer to do so since the pandemic began. More closings are planned.
The NBA says it plans to start holding basketball games again. All remaining games will happen at Disney World, and only the 22 teams that are in or near playoff position can take part.
The NBA Board of Governors approved a plan to restart basketball season with a tentative July 31st start date. The games are set to resume at Disney World in Florida. 22 of the NBA's 30 teams will play 8 games to determine a 16-team playoff field. The NBA would crown a finals champion no later than October 12th. The vote on the modified season format was approved 29-1. Only the Portland Trail Blazers voted against it. All games, practices, and housing would be at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex at Disney. By using Disney World as the venue, the league hopes to limit outside exposure to the pandemic. Disney World has multiple hotels and arenas. The NBA was the first North American sports league to suspend its season over the virus pandemic, after a player tested positive for the virus in mid-March. Other players also found out they had the virus. 8 teams from each of the 2 conferences that are currently in playoff positions will return for the season, plus 6 teams that are 6 games or fewer behind the last playoff spot in their respective conferences. And if the NBA can handle the shortened season, the next season will begin on December 1st.
In France, the Versailles Palace is about to reopen to the public. But as lockdown eases, there's little certainty about when tourists will return.
The most famous fountains in France are working again, a sign that life is back at France's Palace of Versailles. The sumptuous palace was built in the 17th century by the Sun King Louis XIV. It reopens its doors to the public again on June 6th. Louis XIV built the palace as a symbol of France's prominence as a European superpower and his perceived divine right to rule. For president of the palace, Catherine Pagard, it's still the case today.
This is part of the history of Versailles. Every time there have been dramatic events in France, life resumes in Versailles when it resumes in France.
The Hall of Mirrors was dusted today, and its gilded statues were polished by workers ahead of the reopening. Every detail counts for the palace to get its beauty back after being closed for 82 days. As for the Queen's bed, it requires a micro-vacuum cleaning.
It's very fragile, but everything is fragile anyway. It all needs to be cleaned with kindness.
Visitors are required to wear face masks and follow a one-way route through the opulent 2,300-room complex. But there's one big challenge for the palace. Its borders remain closed to most outsiders. In normal times, the palace receives 20,000 visitors on peak days. But now they only anticipate 1/5 of that number. For now, the palace will return to its French visitors. It will have to wait for the border to reopen to welcome back foreign tourists.
Italy's seawater is more pristine these days. New results of a nationwide survey show there's been a big improvement in water quality. Some say it could be related to lockdown measures.
30 million tourists visit Rome each year, but when Italy ordered everyone home on March 10th, the number of visitors to the region dropped significantly. Marco Lupo, General Director of Lazio Region Environmental Agency, said they have seen reduced pollutants compared with the 2 previous years.
We noticed from the first results a noticeable reduction in the quantity of pollutants coming from anthropic influence. I'm talking about pollutants coming from human activities such as nitric nitrogen, total nitrogen, but also phosphorus.
Roberto Archiprete, a marine biologist working for a local fishing cooperative, said the amount of fish unloaded this year increased compared to last year, and it could be related to the blockade on maritime traffic.
We noticed that in April 2020 compared with April 2019, we unloaded more than 60,000 kilograms of fish, while in 2019 we had 52,000.
Coast Guard Admiral Vincenzo Leone, in charge of the Lazio region, says it was appropriate to seize the moment to understand whether the visible effects of eliminating tourism and boating had a real effect on water quality.
The hope is to provide to the institutions and to decision makers information and indications that before it was impossible to give, and hopefully to take more effective action to protect the sea. Because as we often say, there is only one sea, and we must protect it.
Leone says the results of the sea surveys will be published by the Environment Ministry and will help guide future policy.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.